Welcome to another Tuesday night podcast where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Tonight we have a real estate investor, Scott Edward, lined up, and Scott is in Arizona. And you guys are hearing it. Real estate is in Main Street media right now. You're hearing about the housing shortage everywhere, crazy prices. I mean, things are just selling it for top dollar. And actually, we're experiencing some supply shortages and increase in costs. If you're a seasoned real estate investor, you probably know about all these things and some of the things that can go wrong when you're getting into doing a rehab. But for those of you that maybe it's your first real estate investment, your first flip, or your first rental you're looking for, tonight we're going to try and help you avoid some costly mistakes. Guys, I'm Todd Sachs. I'm a real estate broker here in Maryland. And we help buyers and sellers and tenants in both residential and commercial real estate transactions. But if you're anywhere else other than Maryland, we can help you too. I have an amazing broker network all throughout the country. And all you got to do is hit us up. Our contact information is in the show notes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet Scott. Scott, thanks so much for being on our show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you having me. And yeah, we got to know each other a little bit last week. And so I'll tell the viewers a little bit more about me and my history. So I'm out of Arizona, like you said. I've been investing in real estate for going on 10 years now. I bought my first house at the age of 25, and that kind of inspired me to start flipping houses and getting into more advanced deals that I'm into today. And I do work a full-time corporate job along with the real estate investing that I'm doing. I loosely say part-time. Some weeks it feels like my real estate investing is also a full-time job. And I recently also started a YouTube channel about 9 or 10 months ago to kind of share my experiences with people. And that's how we ended up connecting.
So why real estate? I mean, 25 years old, I know real estate is trending with millennials right now. I mean, it's hot, right? There was just an article that was written in the Wall Street Journal back at the end of February that said that now there are actually more real estate agents than there are available houses to buy. What piqued your interest in real estate?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It was a combination of a few things. The first is my upbringing. So my mom and stepdad, we moved out to Arizona when I was 12, and they got into this cycle where we would buy a house kind of on the outskirts of town where there weren't even streetlights. There were stop signs and cows everywhere you looked. And then they would wait for it to be developed all around us, which would take a couple of years. And then we'd sell and we'd move farther to the outskirts of town and then wait until it gets developed all around us. And then we'd sell. So I ended up moving, I think 3 times between when we moved out here and whenever I finally moved out of the house. And so I saw my parents going through this cycle of kind of investing in real estate in their own way, and how every time we moved, we upgraded our house a little bit more. And so I was fascinated by the concept at a young age, going to open houses all the time and looking at real estate with my parents. And then right out of high school, I became a real estate agent because of that, or I went through real estate school. But before I actually pursued real estate as an agent, I had a friend who was a mortgage loan officer at the time, and this was right before the crash. So this was early 2007, and he was making a killing, and he was my age. He was 19 years old at the time, and he was like, you should come work for me and sell loans for a little while you figure out this real estate agent thing. So I went and worked for him or worked with him, not for him. And I was a mortgage loan officer all the way up into the crash, and then for about 6 months after the crash. And I did well as a loan officer. But another thing that inspired me to get into real estate is that chapter of life where I was writing loans for people and getting a deeper understanding of the finance side of how real estate works. And I surrounded myself with a bunch of older guys. I was a 19-year-old mortgage loan officer in an office with a bunch of 40 and 50-year-old guys who had been in the business forever. They'd been investing forever. And so they taught me a lot of valuable principles at a young age. One of those, which was invest in real estate ASAP.
So let's talk about that first house. So was it a flip, or did you actually live in it? Did you house hack? I mean, what was the purpose of it?
It was, so that initial house that I purchased was just a single family house. It was actually a flip in that it was already flipped before I even bought the place. So it was turnkey, beautifully remodeled. I was looking for a 2 to 4 unit property at the time, and I was really aggressively pursuing those, but I was using an FHA loan. I didn't have much money. And so I was putting offers out on these 2 units, 3 units, 4 units all over town. And I kept on getting beat out by cash investors or people who were able to pay more, had more aggressive offers. And so I finally was like, I just need to buy something. And so I found this really nice 1,100 square foot single family, 3 bedroom, two bath house just right down the street from where I still live today, actually. And I moved in, and I got some roommates who paid for most of my mortgage. And so I had very little overhead while I lived there. And not long after I moved in, I was looking back on tax records just because that's what I do. I'm always kind of just trying to understand how the world works. And I realized that the people that I bought my house from bought it 6 months prior for 103,000, and I bought it off of them for, I think it was 179,000. So I was like, wow, they're onto something here. They provided a great service to me as a first time buyer with a turnkey home, and they probably made a good amount of money while they were at it. So that is what really inspired me to start getting into house flipping, or researching it a little bit more anyway. And then about 6 months or a year later, I did my first deal.
So when you were moving around with your parents and sort of, moving to those outskirt areas and watching things develop, I mean, were your parents actually doing the improvements to the houses? Were they remodeling the houses prior to selling them?
Yeah, my stepdad was a handyman. He would they were production home builders' homes, so they were new builds, but he would buy them with all of the most basic finishes, because he always believed that, like, you're overpaying if you let the builder put in nice finishes. So he would kind of just get a shell of the house, and then once we moved in, he would kind of tinker with everything and put up nice backsplash, or change out the flooring in some rooms, or change out the vanities in the bathrooms. So it was kind of a very light live-in remodel in a new build home, which was kind of funny, but that was my experience.
So, for me, when I got married, I put my wife through that whole construction process. We
Yeah.
used to buy these houses and basically dismantle them, and we would live through the construction, and then, I would sell it and, live there for 2 years. And then you could realize those profits without paying taxes on them as your primary residence. And we did that and kind of bounced around a little bit. It's funny because my kids grew up. I mean, they don't want anything to do really. Well, that's not true. They are interested in real estate investing. One time, we actually removed the whole back wall of the house, and I put up a plastic wall, and literally, the wind could blow it down and things could come in. and we lived that way for a couple of weeks. So I mean, it's welcome to having a father and a husband that has been contracting his whole life. But anyway, so talk about the real estate aspect as an agent. Why did you stop that?
Well, I mean, remember, I really didn't even get into being an agent. I started because I felt like that was probably the best first step to get my feet wet into real estate. But just as soon as I got out of real estate school, I had this friend who was working at Countrywide selling subprime loans, and so
Countrywide.
I left. I left my pursuit of being a real estate agent and to go work for Countrywide. It was actually a conflict of interest for me to be a real estate agent, so I had to put my license inactive, and I'd never looked back. So I've never went back to being a real estate agent, and just really because I have too much on my plate, I prefer to delegate that task to agents when I'm doing my house flips and my other investments. But that's my experience being a real estate agent.
Scott, let's talk about that for a minute because that's interesting. A lot of people that we deal with or that I know, they start out investing and they get this, idea that, hey, I want to save a couple dollars. So, I don't want to pay the commission. I can put that extra $5,000 in my pocket. I say that is like a huge mistake for many investors, to cross that line. about why you would rather hand that off, that responsibility, to a licensed real estate professional?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons, and the first is definitely just time. I know that right now, with everything else I have on my plate, if I chose to be my own agent on these house flips, I wouldn't do it well. I wouldn't be able to dedicate enough time to it to do a good job. And I've worked with a lot of great agents over the years to see that to do it right is tough. It's hard work, and it requires a lot of hours and a lot of marketing and a lot of networking. And so that's the biggest reason, is just that I don't have time for it. But beyond that, I like to be able to just, if I drive by a house that I like, or if I see a neighbor as I'm walking my dog, or, if I discover a property that I feel like might be a good fit for me, I like to be able to maybe just call the listing agent or call a buyer's agent that I've worked with in the past and say, hey, I'd like to have you help me get this place under contract. And they deal with all the regulation and the paperwork and and using the right language to lock the place up. And that ensures that I'm not crossing any lines. Like if I were to do a deal that was structured more like a wholesale deal, where I was just trying to lock a place up and then sell it off to another investor. I don't know if there's any regulation around that. If you are a licensed agent, there probably is. And so I prefer to just not be a licensed agent and hand that off to someone who can kind of protect me and make sure that we're playing by the rules.
It's a great point. And you have to take advantage of those off-market deals too when you're investing. And you're right. I mean, I question a lot. I know that agents, there are licensees, and I'm a broker, like I said, here in Maryland. I don't know about all the state laws and things like that, but I think it's an important point that when you are licensed, when do you turn on and off those, responsibilities, those ethics, and not saying that wholesaling is unethical. I'm not saying that at all. But the fact of the matter is, if somebody's selling a house as a licensee, we know that if that goes to market, if it's listed, it's probably going to bring more money than it will if a private investor just does an off-market deal. So it's kind of like, I feel our responsibility at that point to say, hey, I know you're in a position where you'd like to just make this thing go away quickly. That's one avenue, certainly, with a wholesaler or doing an off-market deal. But if we went to market, we could probably get you more money. And it is. It's also nice. I like to think that it's nice to have that buffer. So if you have good, agent representation, they will run those comps for you. Sometimes we like to fall as investors. We like to fall in love with the property. You can't do that. You have to not fall in love with the real estate. You have to really be focused on making money, or you won't be doing it for very long. So, a great agent can help you really say, wait a minute, hold on, Scott, what are you talking about here? It's a no-go because the comps don't work, or, not going to get your money out of it. Have you gotten much into rentals?
So it's funny. I kind of went backwards, and I got into Airbnb short-term rentals before I got into long-term rentals, because I've been somewhat obsessed with the idea of creating some streams of real income, maybe not even necessarily passive income as a lot of people like to look for, but just steady streams of income. And so I got pretty deep into the Airbnb business starting in 2017, and then I ended up getting out of it in 2020. And so that was my first real experience with rentals. And I ended up buying 3 houses over the course of 3 years, converting them all into full-time Airbnbs. They were all 4-bedroom, 2-bath homes with a swimming pool and a great walkable location in Scottsdale. So they fit the bill for Airbnb for sure. But we talk about me delegating to agents. I also delegated the property management to a property manager for all of these properties. And, I felt like I underwrote the deal appropriately, all 3 of these deals from the beginning. But what I learned after I started running these things and watching the paydays come in is that the property manager was eating up basically all of that income that I was hoping for. And so after having run all 3 of these properties for 3 years, I realized, okay, they might be grossing $65,000 or $70,000 per year each, which sounds impressive at face value. But if I'm only bringing in a couple $100s per month each on these places, then I need to get out of the Airbnb business. So I got out of that and I started to focus more on long-term rentals. So right now I'm holding one single family long-term rental, and within a few hours later today, I'm closing on my second long-term rental, which is actually a commercial deal. So I'm waiting for that email.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
So Airbnb, do you feel if you would have scaled that bigger, those costs would have, been more mitigated? Or do you see that if you were to double that or triple that, 9 units, the management fees would continue to, eat up those profits?
Yeah, I think if you were to scale, that would help. The reason that 3 properties was my target is because my property manager that I selected dropped her fee from 25% to 20% of the gross income once you got to 3 properties under her management. And so that was an important milestone for me because I felt like that would be kind of the sweet spot where the cash flow would start to present itself to me instead of to her. But even once I got to that 20% threshold, I realized, these are all old houses around here. So these places are built back in the 50s and 60s. And when you've got a 4-bedroom house with a bunch of beds crammed into it, the wear and tear on these places was insane. So these tenants, it's bachelor parties and bachelorette parties and people coming out here for the Open or Barrett Jackson, and they're partying and they're tearing up your furniture and probably tearing up the other systems too, which I never realized, but I could forecast it. I was like, we're sleeping 15 people in this house. They're tearing up the plumbing lines and the sewer lines and the electrical systems and who knows what else just by existing there in such a large capacity. And so the AC unit during the summer, they're cranking it down, I'm sure, as low as it can go. So I saw that these properties weren't cash flowing like I expected, and initially mainly because of the property management fees. But long term, there was no way that these specific properties that I chose would be good cash flow opportunities. So that's why I ended up selling them. The market was right to sell anyway. So I felt like I needed to just get that capital out and redeploy it into something that makes more sense for me. I know there's a ton of people out there who make a killing with Airbnb. It wasn't for me in my market.
Any tips that you would have for anybody listening that is considering Airbnb? Any good nuggets you can provide there? Besides, don't do it.
Besides, don't do it. I think the biggest thing for me, I've used Airbnb on both sides. I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs myself, and I've been on the other side as a host. And I think what's most important, and this is another thing I lost touch with the property manager, is every guest is tied to an experience, which is tied to a review that hits your listing. And so just one bad review can throw off your Airbnb algorithm. And now all of a sudden they're not pushing your property anymore. And because I wasn't a host that was very hands-on, I wasn't able to provide a special experience to make sure everything was perfect in that property. And so I ended up getting some reviews. I mean, my overall average score was like 4.3 or something across the properties. But if you get those bad reviews early on, it'll wreck you, and it's going to be really hard to ramp up your bookings and then ultimately increase your prices. So that's my biggest bit of advice, is think about the guest experience. And every time a new guest checks in, hopefully you're self-managing and you think about, how will I get a 5-star review out of this guest? Because that's what the business is all about. It's so review driven, unlike long-term rentals. And so you've just got to be, in the beginning, especially when you don't have a whole lot of reviews, you have to be doing everything you can to get those 5-star reviews.
That's great advice. So flipping, what was your first true flip? I mean, what was that like? Can you kind of walk us through the deal?
Yeah, it was scary. It was really scary. So it was a property that this little pocket that I live in here is primarily where I've done all my business since I got started, including that first house that I bought that I told you about earlier. So this was another one that was right down the street. I know this market really well, and that's why I've kind of stuck within this market. It was a property that was off market, so it was a pocket listing, like some agents call it, that was brought to me because leading up to me doing this first deal, I was obsessively calling every agent in town. Every time I drove by a sign, I was going to the RIAs, which is like a big real estate meetup that they do locally. They probably do one out there as well. So I was networking like crazy, just trying to meet as many people as I could. And sure enough, I got a phone call from one of these agents that said that they had a distressed seller who was really looking to get out of their current situation. And they wanted to present the opportunity to me, of all people, first before bringing it to market or presenting it to other investors. And so I went out there, I ran the numbers, and I really trusted in this agent to run the comps and kind of walk me through what it would potentially be worth if I were to do X, Y, and Z. And I took out a big, scary loan at a high interest rate, and I bought the place. It needed about, I think, $45,000 or $50,000 worth of work, just a gut remodel inside. So flooring, baseboards, paint, kitchen, bathrooms, the landscaping. There's a swimming pool out back that needed to be resurfaced, but it was a pretty cookie cutter remodel, like nothing too scary, no permits required or anything like that. And so, that was my agent who represented me. I worked with a contractor who I also met through this flurry of networking that I did. And so a guy that I'd never worked with before, but he had some good references. And so I took that for what it was worth. And I was fortunate in that everything worked out almost exactly as planned. I picked out all my own finishes on that place. And looking back, it was kind of embarrassing, the selection of finishes that I chose, but it sold. So who cares? That was back when the Browns were in. So it was like a travertine style floor with brown walls and brown doors and casings and baseboards. And it was just, I've got a different palette today, and I go for a more modern style, but the flip took about 2 or 3 months. I don't remember all the exact numbers, but what was it? Let me try to think here. I think I bought it for like $215, put 50 into it, and sold it for $330, somewhere in that range. And so, so the net profit on the deal was like 40 grand. And so it was good, and really good. I mean, that's still, especially in this market, what I would consider a home run if, on an entry level flip like that, especially in a couple of months. And, so that's the story on my first flip.
So let's kind of break it down a little bit for the listeners. So how did you finance the deal? You say you took out a loan for, the purchase. Was it hard money?
Yeah. So it was a combination of hard money and private equity. So and to differentiate the two, your viewers might understand, but hard money is more of they work a little bit more like a traditional lender. Like you could find local hard money lenders on Google if you look it up now, but they charge usually a point or two up front. And then nowadays around here, 12% or so interest. And then a private equity lender is a family member or a friend or someone who has money and they don't know what to do with it. And so I used a combination of the two for that deal because I had just purchased my first house, that we talked about earlier. And so I didn't really have any capital left to invest in my first flip. So those lenders put a lot of confidence in me being able to get the deal done. And ultimately they took a good chunk of the profit through their interest and points and everything. But I didn't care because, as they say, 50% of a deal is better than 0% of no deal. So I was fine with paying these lenders for their services. And I still do to this day. I've never funded a deal with all of my own money, and I have no interest in doing that, no matter how much I scale.
That's a good point too. And, I hear a lot, no matter what a borrower's capabilities are, as far as their credit and things like that, even if they have great credit and they have, some cash, using hard money lenders and private money from your family and or friends or something like that, actually, they're entitled to make a little bit of money, right? So they're entitled to the money that they profit. But a lot of times especially when you're starting out, a lot of these hard money lenders, if they believe in you and they like the deal, they have connections too. So they can connect you with the contractors and, other people that will kind of guide you and can help you along. Certainly ask questions. YouTube's a great resource for, finding out people like Scott, how they do what they do. 2 to 3 months for the rehab. You said that you had estimated 45 to 50,000 in repairs. You kept it in budget. Do you ever get into a situation where, you buy these houses and you're off on your numbers?
Yes. I think every time since that deal, it's funny because that was the first deal that I've ever done. And it was like the poster child of house flips. Like everything went exactly like it should have. And I'm grateful for that because if I got burned on that one, I don't know that I would have had the motivation to carry on because it was stressful to take on all of that risk and oversee this project with a full-time job. And there was so much unknown. But since then, to go back to your question, yes, there has been what I've learned since then is that you're always going to go over budget, especially on these old houses. That's primarily what I target. You're always going to end up opening up a wall and discovering something that you didn't expect. And so I always pad the budget now. If a contractor tells me it'll take 50 grand to do the remodel, I'll budget for 60. Or if I know in loan cost, I plan for this thing to take 3 months, I'll budget for 6 or even 9, just in case maybe I get it done in 3, but what if it doesn't sell for 9 months? And so I try to pad it in every direction. And that conservative nature that I've had over the years, I think has held me back a little bit. I probably could have done more deals had I been willing to take a little bit more risk, but I kind of pad the deals in every direction now just because I know that it always takes longer than you think. It always costs more than you expect it to cost.
How do you find your contractors?
So it's generally just through word of mouth. So there's a contractor that I'm working with right now on 2 flips that I used on my last deal, and there was a lot of headache with that deal. It just like I had said, it took way longer than I thought it would. It ended up costing way more than I thought it would. But contractors are hard to come by right now, and I had a good relationship with this one. He always answers his phone. He's a nice, honest family man. I really appreciate him as a person. I know that his intentions are good. I think that he made some mistakes on the last one, so we started off on the right foot on these next couple of deals. But it's funny, though, going to your question of how do I find him, realistically, I know that I unfortunately don't think that I'll have access to this contractor forever. Something will happen. He'll end up scaling his business or focusing on other things or moving out of state or whatever. Something always happens. And so how will I find the next one? It'll be word of mouth. I'll talk to other investors, other real estate agents. And when it comes time to find a new contractor that I kind of choose to latch onto, I'll always look for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them, depending on the scope of work. And I'll meet him at the project and I'll just talk to him, and get to know him. Because for me, it's just as much, it's very important that they're on time and that they stick to the budget, but it's also important that I have a good relationship with them and that I just enjoy their company as a person, because you don't want to be bumping heads with a contractor throughout the process of a house flip. A house flip already has enough bumps in the road. The last thing you need is to have to go through that process with someone that you don't vibe with.
And they'll hold you at bay too. I mean, it's got, some of them want some deposit money, to bring in the materials or get started. And then, a lot of times it's hard to get them to come and actually finish the job, or they started. I mean, it seems like a common amongst these contractors to start the deal, get the check, and then go off and chase the next check and then trying to get them back. And unfortunately, there's a process. Do you use a general contractor that manages all the subs because you're working a full-time job, or are you actually GCing the projects yourself and hiring individual contractors like your electricians, your plumbers, your heating and air, your drywall guys, your painting guys? Are you handling and managing all of them?
Almost every time I've hired a general contractor for the exact reason that you just said in this, that I don't have the time to sub everything out myself. The house that I'm living in now that you see behind me, I kind of used it. I bought this house about 2 years ago, and I used this house as an experiment of what if I were to sub everything out myself, because I've been doing this long enough. I've got a lot of contacts that I really like and trust. So I'm going to sub this house out myself and kind of see what happens and study the numbers. And what I found with this house is that I actually think that I spent more on this house than had I just hired a general contractor to do the whole project for me, because they would have got the job done faster, more than likely. And they have resources and in-house guys that can come out and do the work for much less than me finding another licensed subcontractor. And so this house was an interesting lesson for me because for 9 years I've been using general contractors, and I move into this house thinking, I wonder how much I could save. Maybe I can become a general contractor myself, or at least sub these jobs out myself and save a significant amount of money. But at least in this example, I proved myself wrong.
You're a smart guy. I think people really need to pay attention to that. I'm going to give you another as a contractor. So I've been a contractor since 1989. And if you're considering getting into the real estate business as far as, as an investor, and you want to do a couple flips, or even if you are buying a distressed property that you want to hold and turn that into a rental, what happens is you're not keeping people busy. So if you have a painting contractor, or you have, a framing contractor, or a trim carpenter, or, somebody that's hanging cabinets, you're not able to keep them busy. So their loyalty to you is very little.
Yeah.
They're going to who pays their bills. With a general contractor, typically they do keep these subcontractors busy. So they're bouncing them around from project to project to project. So they're not having the problems with the trades not showing up or not finishing it or doing what they're supposed to do, because for them, that would be horrible. They would be cutting off their income because the GC is literally feeding these subcontractors and their families. So I think that's a great point. I think you're very smart for doing that. I always say there's three types of investors. There's the investor that, has the cash. They don't want to get involved with anything, but they want to diversify their portfolio a little bit. Maybe they're into the stocks, maybe they do, some rentals, but they really don't want to touch anything. They want to turn it over to people and invest the money and reap the rewards. If you have a lot of money to invest, you can surround yourself with a great team. It's a great way to go. The next kind of middle level, we'll say, is I'm going to say somebody like Scott, that really wants to grow his portfolio. He loves what he loves the real estate aspect. He doesn't mind getting his hands dirty. He'll meet with people, he'll go look at properties, but he has a full-time job. And then there's we'll call it the third tier, third category, which is somebody that that's all they do. They're contractors, they buy, they flip full-time, and they are their own GCs because they are keeping the people busy. Since you've had 9 years under your belt and a lot of experience doing this, are you finding that now you're getting better terms, more money? Can you explain, how you're funding your deals now?
Yeah. So I've got two kind of go-to lenders that I use now that have been funding most of my recent deals, and the terms are much more attractive nowadays than they used to be. So just to give you some perspective on these two house flips that I'm doing right now, I have a 7.99% interest only rate on those deals, and they're funding 90% of the purchase and then 90% of the rehab. And so they're funding almost the entire deal at a rate that's pretty fair, and they act fast enough to where I can make an offer that's as good as cash. So even though I'm technically taking out a loan, whenever I'm having my agent present that offer on these places, I can present it as cash because I know that these guys can close really quick. And so that's important too. When you're taking on these with leverage, you need to make sure that you're working with someone who can act fast and then give you an offer that's as good as cash. Because if you called any big bank and tried to get a loan on a house flip, they probably wouldn't do it. But if you found maybe a smaller bank or credit union that would, well, that's not going to do you any good if it's going to take them 45 days to close the deal. And so the relationships, and this took me a long time too, to establish relationships with some lenders that trusted me and that I felt comfortable with. But it's come down to these two. I've brought on anywhere from 1 to 4 investors or lenders in on any given deal. The biggest deal that I did in Phoenix, it was a luxury house flip. I did a video on it. It's over on the side of Camelback Mountain. It was a great experience, but it was a huge project. So I had to take on a total of 4 investors to fund that deal. And it ended up being a success for all of us, thankfully. but that's it. You have to be creative. Every deal is different than the last. And so, one of the investors on that deal was my general contractor. He liked the deal so much that he asked me, as I was touring the space with him during our inspection, if he could be an investor on it. So that was awesome. That was not expected, but that made my life a lot easier as I was trying to go through the fundraising part of this process on that deal.
Can you talk about how you select your houses? What kind of process do you have? The market is very tight right now. There's very few houses available, and this is nationwide. It's not just, as we discussed earlier. I actually just spoke with somebody in Canada, and they're having the same thing. I mean, houses are selling multiple offers, higher than list price. What makes a house attractive, and how are you securing the deal?
Okay, so what makes a house attractive first? It's not just an old saying when they say location, location, location. That's very real, and that is the first bit of criteria that I follow, no matter what. So it's what location is it in? Meaning, if you're looking on a high level, what zip code is it in? I like 85251 and 85257. There's two zip codes that I target aggressively right now. And then once you're inside of that zip code, what neighborhood is it in? Because not all the neighborhoods in these zip codes are right. And I know them all really well. I've driven up and down every street within these zip codes many times. And then once you're on that street, are there any negative external factors? So when you're sitting on the property itself, are there any big ugly power lines, or maybe a school that's a few streets away where you can hear the football, like the band and things like that. So first, location is super important, but once you hone in on the house itself, the next bit of parameters I'm looking at is how workable is the existing floor plan. And so I know what walls can be taken down or moved around to make give a house that open concept feel that people love, but still check all the boxes of 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, minimum of 1,600 square feet. There's certain things that buyers are looking for. And so first, location. Second, is the floor plan workable as it sits? Because some floor plans, you just think, what were they thinking back in 1959? This floor plan is awful. There's no way to make this cool or flow right, And so that's another part, because if the floor plan isn't very functional as it sits, it's going to cost you a fortune to make that floor plan functional. So that's another important factor. And then the last bit of your question is getting it down to actually locking up the deal. And you have to be comfortable making a dozen offers before you get one accepted. And you have to have an agent who's comfortable doing that too, because, gone are the days that you can submit an offer for cash with a quick close, waiving your inspection for $50,000 less than the asking price and get the deal. Sellers know that the market's hot, and sellers know that if they list their house for $400,000, there's probably going to be a bidding war. So I can't come in with a $350,000 offer anymore. But I do have to come in with a strong offer close to their asking price with a quick close and a good story. And so I've played on my story a lot lately, and I have an agent who tells my story really well. And that kind of pulls on the heartstrings of sellers that, they hear that it's a young guy who's trying to kind of get his, foothold in this submarket. He really loves this house. He's done several houses in this neighborhood. He plans to renovate it and make this neighborhood better. And he lives right down the street, the whole deal. And so her telling that story, I'm not there in the middle of the conversation, but she's told me that these last two deals, if it weren't for my story combined with my aggressive offer, I wouldn't have got the deal, because there were a dozen other people in line.
Are you doing any type of contingencies? Do you have like an as-is inspection contingency, or are you just at this point taking the risks?
So I will put that I'll take the property as is every time, meaning I'm telling the seller from day one, I'm not going to come back to them and say, I need you to fix this leaky faucet or replace the AC unit. But I still ask for an inspection period, unless it's just the perfect location deal of a lifetime. I still always like to have my 5 days or 7 days. It used to be 10 days, but I trim it down now. And the biggest reason is to lock up my financing. I usually can walk the house and know what it's going to take to to renovate it and roughly be on budget for the remodel side of it. And so that part's easy for me. I could even do that from the photos, really, but I need a couple of days just to make sure I can call up one of my two guys that I was talking about earlier and say, hey, you still willing to lend me money on this deal? Because if not, then I'd be in trouble.
You and I have a lot in common. I mean, I teach a lot of people this investing game, and I've been doing it for 25 plus years. Bought a lot of houses, rehabbed a lot of houses. I've had a lot of mistakes, and some of them, I haven't always won. I've lost money on deals. I hate to, admit that, but it's true. Even with as much experience as I have, I still, you're going to make a mistake. You just hope it doesn't take you out. Some of my biggest mistakes have been going against those golden rules that you just sort of identified. Number one is location. I mean, as cliche as that sounds, unless you're going to keep that house forever and you are buying for cash flow purposes forever. And when I say that, I want everybody to understand, when you're buying anything other than a single family home, you're buying a duplex, a triplex, a 4-unit or bigger. Most of the time when you go to sell that, you're going to be selling that to an investor. And ask yourself, does an investor want you to make a profit? The answer is no, right? They're buying it based on cash flow. So the cheaper they can buy it, the more cash flow. So, and unless you're talking about, these 100-unit complexes and things like that, where people are going in and spending stupid money on, because there's a lot of upside and, renovations and value add that they can make money. We're talking two different things. Buying cash flow properties, they can be in those areas where the power lines are necessarily, that renters don't mind being there. But if you want to flip that house, the only thing that gives you the best profit are the most amount of people wanting to be there. So if you're looking at things across the street that are undesirable, those power lines, the messy neighbor, the barking dogs, a pack of barking dogs next door that every time you show the house, the people are like, oh my gosh, these dogs haven't shut up since we've been here.
Yep.
Unless price is dictating why they should be there, which means you're losing, it's a bad deal. So most of the time that I've lost has been either one, the wrong location. I made those exceptions and said, you know what, we're going to do it anyway. Or, in our area, basements are critical, or not having a full basement that someone can walk down in. And when I buy these flips with no basements, unless they're on the water where you can't have a basement or shouldn't have a basement. I don't know, you may not have basements in Arizona, but that is another, loser for me through the years. And then floor plan, you're right. When you walk into that house, if it's chopped up oddly and it's an old house, man, you could spend, depending on, where the load bearing walls are. Now you're getting into structural issues. Now you're talking about, heavy duty permitting and getting engineers involved, and sometimes architectural drawings and things like that gobble up your profit. Do you always get permits, Scott?
Am I allowed to answer that question?
That is the question, right?
Anytime that I'm supposed to get permits, yep, I'll get permits. I mean, around here, it's, if you're adding square footage or you're enclosing a garage, maybe there's a lot of carports around here. That was popular in the 50s and 60s, were carports, but now people like garages. So if you're enclosing a carport and turning it into a garage, you need a permit for that. Or if you're expanding the master bedroom because it's got a tiny little walk-in ensuite bath, and you want to make that bigger and more up to modern standards. And so you're kind of moving the master into the backyard. You need a permit for that. And, yes, I do get permits for my jobs and go through the whole process with the architect and the city. And it's a process, and it costs money, but buyers appreciate that when you get permits for those things.
And sometimes, what we're finding is the banks now, or the appraisers, or even now, if you have a good buyer's agent, they're saying, hey, did you pull permits? We see this as a brand new renovation. Sometimes you can even look that up online. And I will say that through COVID, things got tough. I mean, I did a bathroom, pulled a bathroom permit. It took me almost 10 weeks to pull bathroom permit. I mean, this is something that should be basically a walkthrough permit, but the governmental offices were closed down. People were working from home. Things weren't getting into the computers in time. And a lot of times we were calling the inspectors up and they were coming and taking pictures, and it hadn't even been entered into the computer system. And there are other things that you can do too. I mean, you can hire engineers to kind of do your pre-inspections, to certify your work so that when you finally do get permits, if it is a process or it's going to take you longer than you'd like to get those permits, but beware, because a lot of the buyers now are requesting that information or that they're looking into it. And I'm not saying that it's the end of the world necessarily if you didn't pull a permit and you get caught, but it's a lot more costly to go through the permitting process at that point than it would be just to do it from the start. And I'm also going to say, guys, don't let the handyman that doesn't know electrical work do your electrical work. If you're out there and you're not getting these permits, you better at least make sure you have licensed contractors that are doing the work, that are licensed in what they're doing. And I'm not saying don't get permits at all. I'm telling you, get permits, and to something that you need. Find out, a lot of times you don't need permits to do simple change outs and things like that. Painting is, if you're not getting into structural. I know in one of the counties here where we are locally, you do not need a building permit if you're even closing up a room or building a wall, as long as it's not structural. What do you think of these HGTV shows? Millennials are really interested in real estate. I guess first let's answer, do you think that is coming from, where's that coming from? Do you think that's coming from the HGTV shows, or why is it trending so much amongst young people?
That's a really interesting question. I think the HGTV shows had to have done something there. I mean, they're fun to watch. I don't watch a whole lot of TV anymore. If I do, I'm winding down for the last hour and a half of every night, and that's about it. But I enjoy watching those shows, and that's kind of part of what inspired me to start my channel. And I wanted to create kind of like a real life real estate experience on my channel, because I felt like some of those HGTV shows told a good story, but they injected a lot of drama to make it more interesting for TV. And you always wonder, are those numbers real, or how much money do people really make flipping houses? And so that was kind of the reason why I did it. It was almost inspired by all the popularity of those HGTV shows. But I told the story of my upbringing, and I always grew up in a nice household. My mom and stepdad made a good salary, and we were constantly upgrading the place that we live. But if I gave them some criticism, it's that they didn't do a whole lot of saving. And I think that's what inspired me to start saving at such a young age and investing at such a young age as a millennial, is that I saw my parents getting older, and we always lived in a nice house, and I know they always made good money, and I felt like I had a great upbringing in that regard. But I also became aware that they didn't save a whole lot of money, and so as they came closer to retirement, they were looking back and having some regrets. And so for me, I think, and I don't know if that's the case for a lot of millennials and a lot of people in that if their parents are in the same age range, but I started my 401k the day I turned 21. On my 21st birthday, which was the age that, I don't know if that's still the case, but you had to be 21 to open up your 401k account whenever I got started. I started saving right away and just doing that, that forced savings. And then I was interested in investing in real estate before 25, but I bought my first piece of real estate by 25. And I still am kind of obsessed with that idea of setting myself up for a comfortable financial future, so that maybe when I am 50 or 60, I can retire, or at least be semi-retired, and not have to worry about the next 30 years of my life.
Do you see that you will slow down on the flips and go more into the income producing side with residential rentals?
I would like to get into the income side enough to where I can be very selective with the flips that I do. Because right now, I mean, flipping houses is a full-time job, and it's a scary thought in a competitive market like this that it's no guarantee. Like if I left my corporate job tomorrow without some steady cash flow from other rental properties, it would be very stressful thinking about when will I find the next house to flip, because they're not a dime a dozen like they used to be. They're really hard to come by. So yes, I want to create enough income for myself to be able to just at least sustain my relatively simple lifestyle through rentals and continue to flip houses on the side, but be selective and not desperate. And, like, all right, I'm going to pick this one that has the power lines because I need to find a house to flip. I don't want to find myself in that condition. So I am getting away from residential and focus more on commercial now and looking forward, but definitely focused on cash flow and rentals.
That's a good point for a lot of people, especially, we learned a lot from the last 12 months, people losing their jobs, getting furloughed, laid off. A lot of people, I mean, I have friends of mine that actually went back to work. Their companies used the pandemic as a way of reducing their expenses. So if they were making $100,000 a year, they said you can come back, but we can only pay you $70,000 a year. And when you have fixed expenses and mortgages that were based on you needing your entire salary, so I think it is good to hedge against, if you can be in a situation. I will say on the rental side, having the right tenants is the key. I mean, I say all the time, rental is better vacant than, making a mistake on tenant selection, because they can really tie you up and, make that, $500-$600 a month that you profit over all of your costs, $6,000 a year. I mean, they can make you go in the negative. So, but great tips. Scott, what do you look for any agent that's listening, that wants to get involved more with the investor? What can you share that you look for with your real estate agents other than they're, honest and hardworking? What are some of the other things that are important to you as an investor?
The most important thing for an agent to understand is how the numbers work on my side of the deal. So it's really funny how many conversations I've had with agents who call me up and say, look, I found a deal for you. You can buy it for $300,000. You can put 25 into it and you can sell it for 350 and you're going to make 25,000 bucks. And I have to walk them through the process of, first of all, it's going to cost a heck of a lot more than $25,000 to fix that place up. And second of all, you're forgetting about the fact that I owe you a lot of money in commissions. There's other closing costs. There's other holding costs, not just the loans. Even if I was funding this deal in cash, there's the gardener, there's the power, there's the water, there's the gas bill, the property taxes, the insurance. And so there's a lot of expenses that I think that agents don't think about whenever they're presenting deals to me. And it would help me out a lot if I didn't have to go through those motions with agents. And so I really have latched on to just a couple of agents, even though I've met hundreds over the years, probably more. I've probably met 1,000 agents over the years, but I've latched on to 3 that are my go-to right now because they understand what my side of the deal looks like. And I want agents to make money. I've always said that. I'll never suggest that they cut their commission to make a deal work for me. I want them to make money. I want the contractors to make money, the stagers, the designers, the architects, me. I want everyone to make money, but they just need to understand the layers of expenses that come with doing a house flip, and then present deals that are real deals, not deals that just are on the very surface look like they might work.
And you realize that if they don't make money or you're beating them up on their commissions, they're not going to find you deals.
Yep.
And so a lot of people, I don't think they get that concept. I mean, everybody needs to make a profit. I mean, they're in business to make money. And if you want to build that team, you have to acknowledge that they need to be part of your team, and part of the team is that they need to be successful too. And it's sort of like their motivation, right? Great tips. What about as far as there's a lot of part-time agents? Do they have any chance with you, or are you looking for solely full-timers?
I mean, definitely on the buyer's side, I'll take a deal from any agent, so if someone calls me and they've got a deal, then and it's a real deal that makes sense and pencils out for me, then I'll work with them all day, of course. But on the sales side, that's where it gets a little bit more tricky. And I do tell agents that, hey, if you bring me a deal, I'll give it to you on the back end, and you can not only represent me on the buy, but you can represent me on the sell as well. I haven't had a part-time agent bring me a deal that I've done yet, but if I did, I'd probably have to have that conversation with them that, look, when we're done, this will be the price that we're targeting. This will be what the product looks like. Do you have the capacity to market this appropriately to get it sold fast? And that way the expectations are set from the very beginning, and I don't think that you need to be an agent full time in order to sell a house, because, a lot of houses are sold digitally now, it's blasted out on Zillow and Realtor and the MLS, and it ends up in everyone's email box, and someone sees the house and they love it, they'll buy it. So, but a good agent knows how to market it and put it in the front of the right agents who have buyers in that zip code. And so that's what I would want to make sure of. It's not necessarily are you part-time or full-time, but it's are you the right fit for selling this house?
Again, awesome advice. It really is about the neighborhood expert. If you don't know that area, you don't know who that buyer is. I mean, it becomes a lot more challenging. And also even having that agent, tell you what they can get you for the place, because now a lot of times the buyers, if you're unsure of the area, the buyers now are paying over list price and even, paying over appraised value.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on the current market? I mean, as an investor, you're hedged a little bit. You do have a full-time job. You have a salary coming in. You have a rental. You're in the middle of some flips. People are talking about this 21 as being the crash. You have all these experts saying that we're in a bubble. What's your opinion?
There's certain things that I see around here in my market that feel bubble-like. That rental that you just mentioned that I received a off-market cash offer on that place for $650 last week, which I turned down only because I love the house, I love the location, it cash flows great. But if you asked me a year ago what I thought that place was worth or what it would take for me to sell it, I'd probably say $550. And here we are a week ago and someone's offering $650 for it. Maybe I'm crazy for not selling it, but I see things like that happening and I'm like, man, that house isn't worth $650,000. That's an old dated 1959 house that needs a ton of work. It's not worth that. But then there's the other side of the coin that I listen to some of the experts who say that we're not in a bubble and maybe things will correct, but they won't crash. And so I don't really know what's going on, but I know that the way that it affects me the most is that now more than ever, I have plan A, B, and C when I get into a house flip. So for the two that I've got down the street, I picked those specifically based on their location and their rentability, just as much as I think that I can ride this wave of this crazy market and I hopefully will sell them. But if I can't, I know that I can rent them or turn them into an Airbnb. Maybe I'll get back in the Airbnb business. They'd be a good fit for that as well. But I think if you're getting into house flipping, now's an important time to have those multiple exit strategies. You always should, but in the past, you could get away with just saying, I'll flip this house and I'll at least break even, worst case scenario. Nowadays, you're having to make much more speculative buys. I'm buying into a place that, again, a year ago, the after repair value, it wouldn't be anywhere near what it is today. And so I know on one of the two properties in particular where I'm doing a higher end remodel, I'm going to be looking for a price that's higher than appraised value on that house. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but I really believe that if the market stays the same, that it will sell, because I'll do a really tasteful remodel and someone will fall in love with it and they'll be willing to pay over appraised value. But we're in very unique conditions. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say if I think a crash is coming or not. I'm not an economist, but I do tend to lean more towards the side of, I don't know that a crash is coming. And the biggest reason for that, and I don't mean to ramble, but the biggest reason I don't think that a crash is coming is because things are different this time. I worked as a mortgage loan officer through the subprime crisis, and I saw the types of loans that were being written back then, and they were not good loans. They were ARMs, pay option ARMs, super high interest rates, written to people, stated to people who couldn't afford the loans. Nowadays, these buyers are real buyers. They're either taking out 30-year fixed rate loans at 3%, or they're buying cash, or they're putting 30 or 40 or 50% down. And so I tend to think that the wave of people who are buying now aren't going to be people who are facing foreclosure in 2 or 3 years, like we could have maybe expected during 2005, 6, 7.
Yeah, it's great points. Yeah, I also, I don't think we're going to have a major crash. I went through a couple downturns. I mean, you're always going to have fluctuation in the market. I've been contracting. I started my business in 1989, so it was quite some time ago. And I went through the early 90s, and then, of course, what we know is the housing market crash, which, as you're explaining, Scott, was many different factors, had nothing to do with really the housing shortage or buyers or where we are right now. But I think that a couple of things are happening. One, institutional buyers, I'm hearing that they're making up the iBuyer programs. They're scarfing up 30% of the inventory as it comes on the market. So I know that's really keeping the prices high. What their strategies are, who really knows? And then, you have millennials like yourself, and to the tune of like 10 million a year that are going into the home buying phase of their life. Or investing in real estate. So I think that, once the moratorium is removed and foreclosures, at least, every year people unfortunately are foreclosed on. It doesn't take a pandemic to cause that. But I think that, once we see the inventory hit the market more, it's going to get absorbed quickly. And do I think there's going to be a huge correction? I mean, like you said, I'm not a forecaster. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think that we will absorb the inventory quickly. And I think a correction, I wouldn't want to put a percent on it, but I don't think it's going to be a 20% correction. I think our biggest risks right now from investing in real estate are building materials. The costs are rising, and who knows where they're going, these commodity products that are through the roof with steel and lumber and things like that right now. But I'm hearing, so we're painting some apartments that I have in Baltimore, and my painter, and this is a pretty big painting project. I mean, it's not huge. We're doing, 8 apartments, and the outsides, insides and outsides of the buildings. And, the painter said he's running around to the different Sherwin-Williams showrooms to get enough paint to paint these places because they don't have them. They don't have the paint. And, the chemical that comes from wherever it does in the world there's a shortage of that. And his suppliers are saying, look, get as much paint as you think you're going to need because you're not going to have any towards the end of the year. Same thing with water heaters. I had a plumber tell me, you better go buy a couple extra electric and gas water heaters if you can find them, because pretty soon you won't be able to get those either. We're waiting on the most inexpensive basic microwave ovens. 6 weeks, 8 weeks in backlog. So if you're rehabbing and you want to finish that place, chances are you're putting it on the market without a microwave, maybe. So I think they're the challenges that you need to be careful, guys, when you're getting into this real estate flipping market, or even for rental investments. Scott, man, thank you so much. I mean, you are really a smart guy. You're doing this the right way. You have so much to add. We're going to put all your links below your YouTube channel. Guys, if you haven't already done so, we'd love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel or like and follow us on whatever platform you're watching or listening. But check Scott out too. Check his links out below. Subscribe to him as well. He has a lot. He's not, believe me, he's giving this information, free information. If you're considering jumping into this real estate investing game, guys, be educated and surround yourself with great people. Scott, thanks so much for being on our show.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right. And guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Sachs Realty, Maryland, broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal